I would rather use the time now for question and answer. So for question and answer sessions, question that will be entertained is already selected by the committee. The first question is from Pak Mitra to Dr. Bahrul Hayat. Could you please give the concrete example of psychometric approach in daily class situations? Pak Bahrul.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Pak Urip. Thank you, Mitra. It's very interesting questions. Actually, the practical psychometric methodology that can be used for teachers now, I think is available in some application, computer application. But if you don't have anybody who has developed the LPs and also the computer, then you can use what we call the classical approach. If you understand or have learned some of the concept of scalogram. Scalogram is just a simple what we call student profile matrix. Then you can use that student profile matrix can be used as a reference how you order the tasks and the content, curriculum content, and then look at also the achievement of each students by putting all the item from easiest on the column to the hardest. And then the student put from the high score students to the less able students. So you can see whether you have the diagonal, and then you can cut whatever level you want to group the students. If you don't have any other instrument or tool in your hand, so use the student profile matrix by putting item on the column, order item by difficulty from the easiest to the most difficult, and then for the student, put the brightest student at the top, and then the lowest ability student at the bottom. So you can see how you group the student, and then the order of the tasks and contents by column. I think that's also one of the example. If you don't have any tool in Australia, it's very fortunate because ACR developed this kind of instrument, and you can also, of course, learn. You can see on the chat. You can learn some of the ACR product about this one. Yeah.
Okay.
Back to you, Paul.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Pak Bahrul. Maybe next question from Mansur Makassar to Dara, Dr. Ramalingan. Based on the National Research Council, learning progression will effective if it is supported by teachers' ability to make assessment instruments that are appropriate and on target. What is your opinion?
Yeah, this is a really interesting question. Thank you for the question. I think that ascertaining where students are in their learning does rely on good assessment materials. I wouldn't necessarily say that those have to be developed by teachers. I think there are many good resources, assessment resources out there that can be taken and utilised by teachers, and it is not a necessary step that the teacher be the one to create those resources. So that's an important point. The other thing to say is that assessment can come in many forms, and there's, we talk about formative assessment, we talk about summative assessment, but assessment can mean the teacher working one-on-one with a student and asking them to engage in a particular task and then observing what they do with that task. That can be a form of assessment too. And I would also say it's really important not to rely on a single data point, that, perhaps a student sits in assessment one day, they have a cold, they perform poorly. If you see a result that is inconsistent with your overall picture of that student, there's probably a reason. And I think teachers are very gifted at forming an overall picture of students. And so they can and should use multiple sources of information in order to do that.
Thank you. Okay. Next question, maybe. Okay, this is from Sumarno, Unimed. Unimed is in Medan, which is in north of Sumatra. The question to Pak Bahru Hayat is, are learning progressions only assessed from the achievement achieved by students? What about the learning process that have been planned by the teachers? Pak Bahru.
Yeah, thank you, Pak Marna. Of course, because it is learning, again, what we want to assess is the learning outcome. That's the major point of or the focus of what we want to do in the classroom is whether the student experience meaningful learning and then whether the learning outcome are there. If you want to check learning process, there's another issues. Is there anything that you want to see from the learning process? Of course, there are some important points. In psychometric, for example, learning process, if you are working on now on computer, is very, very helpful because you can learn through the log file what is going on by a certain student in response to a certain item. That's if the process is like that one, then you can use the log file. But it's not the learning progression. It is about the issues behind the progression. If you are asking about the learning process or the teaching process, whether we have come to a certain point as say set by the curriculum, there's another issues also. So, but I think the LP, if you develop a good LP, you have a very good pathway for the teachers, how to teach and develop and design meaningful experience that can for the student to attain a certain between quote learning outcome. So all the record of the learning process through the assessment can be used also to see if there are some issues, but it's not the LP itself. And also for the teacher, learning process is again a pathway. So teaching should be along this way. And if you have some problems that do not follow the LPs after you have validated, then you can see what is the problem and why. I think it is always important to look at the process, but again, LP can assist the teacher how to move from one session to the next session, and hopefully they can be either individual or group basis. Probably that's Pak Marno, the relationship.
Thank you, Pak Bahru. Next question. Okay, from Anissa to Dr. Dara Ramalingam. The question is, what is the most essential skill teachers should have to determine students' learning levels? Please.
Thank you. This is a really interesting question too. And I think my response has a lot in common with my response to the previous question. And that is that I'm not sure there is a single most essential skill that teachers should have. I think when we think about learning progressions and we think about how to know what level a student is at, that's a global picture that we are forming. I think a mistake that some people make with learning progressions is to treat them in a very atomized way and try to think, oh, it's as though it's a series of dot points and, oh, they can do this one, they can do this one, they can do this one, so they must be at the level. And learning progressions aren't intended to function like that. Because they're not intended to function like that, my previous remarks apply. I think you need to take in as many forms of evidence as you can about where a student is in a level before making that judgment. So I'm not sure there is a most essential skill. I'm sorry. That's probably not what you want to hear. But I think what a teacher needs to do is gather as much evidence as they can in many different forms to inform that judgment about where a student is at in their learning.
Thank you. Okay, Last question is from Sutianingsih, Win Jakarta, to Pak Bahrul. How learning progression supporting the 21st century learning skill in the class? Pak Bahrul.
Yeah, of course, Bu Sutia, once we put also the 21st century skill, for example, creative thinking or critical thinking, if you put this critical and creative thinkings under Bloom taxonomy, you can link to the level of creative and then synthesis analysis last time. So it's relatively parallel. By having the LP, then you can very clearly see on the level what you call LD, what you call level descriptor. Dara give an example of level descriptor. So you have to make sure from the very beginning that the leveling reflect also the cognitive processes, the content, the context. So you will see whether student has achieved on a certain level, not only the content at the understanding level, but also can move to more creative point. So it depends on how you design, but make sure that when we have the blueprint for development of the instrument, make sure that you put all the necessary 20% century skill on the blueprint. So then we will put also later on the level descriptor. So you can see whether the student has already achieved a certain level of understanding or creative thinking and so on. So yes, Setia, but again, you have to put that on the blueprint at the beginning. And then later on, we calibrate and see the level descriptor can encompass all these 21st century skills. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Pak Bahrul. Next question is from PSPK, Pak Kosin, to Dr. Ramalingan. Is learning progressions also applies to students from multicultural country like Indonesia?
This is another excellent question. Before I answer that one, let me just say, I just popped a note in the chat on that question of 21st century skills, just two quick things. We have tried in the ACR learning progressions to build in those 21st century skills into the domain-based learning progressions, so that something like creative thinking is central to writing, for example. Critical thinking can be central in reading when you're evaluating different perspectives and those sorts of skills. So that's, but we do also have skill development frameworks that describe how creative thinking, critical thinking and collaboration develop in a general way. So you may be interested to go and look at those. Now, in terms of this question about students from a multicultural country like Indonesia, I didn't say this in the presentation, I think, but when we were putting together the learning progressions that I demonstrated for you, we drew on assessment, 11 different assessment programs. And they included large-scale assessments, so material that's administered in many different countries. They included regional assessments. They included country-specific assessments, but sometimes large countries where you would expect diverse populations. So I guess we drew on as much different evidence as we could in developing those descriptions, and that's what helps us to be confident that they should be applicable in different contexts and different circumstances. We didn't, for example, only use Australian data. The data was from many different programs used internationally. So that is how I would answer that question. Yes, I think LPs can also apply, even in a country with a diverse population.
Okay, thank you. Okay, next question. I think in the interest of time, we have, I think this is going to be our last question to be answered from Agi Green to Pak Bahrul Hayat. In your opinion, when education is so dependent on politics, How can we build a management at the school level that is agile and adaptive to change? Thank you. Pak Bahu.
Yeah. Thank you, Pak Ruf. Thank you, Pak Egi. Again, the dependency on politics, especially on defining the goals of the nation, and then you have to put what are the education system should move and should go from now. So it is very clearly stated in the context of Indonesia, for example, what are the expectation of the PhD generation of Indonesia and what kind of subject is mandatory for all students. This is the political agreement at the parliament, with parliament from government side and parliament. So that's what I mean, that on the goal and educational purposes is more on the political issues, because it is the agreement. Curriculum in the context of Indonesia was always signed by the minister. It's not by the technical person. So in other words, this is the high level of decision. But again, it does not mean that we don't give the a room or space or authority for the school and teachers, school principal and teachers. So that is why the school-based management, to make sure that the creativity and the implementation of education at the hand of the principal and teacher. So the decision about the goals are very critical for the political decision. But again, the implementation of education, the creativity, and the teaching learning process are at the hand of the teachers. That is why Indonesia adopt what we call school-based management. We give the room and space for the teachers and school principal to creatively work on implementing the educational policies. Thank you, Agi.
Okay. Thank you, Pak Bahu. Ladies and gentlemen, friends, colleagues, we almost come to the end of our sessions today, sharing sessions. So I see, thank you very much for spending your time with us. And of course, thank you to our two presenters, Dr. Bahu Hayat and Dr. Dara Lingam, that have enlightened us with this very idea of learning progressions